We are glad that you're here. We're hoping that that you will spread the word for what you learn. The reason for this meeting is to talk about the pros and cons of a convention under Article 5 for proposing amendments, and also we see it online sometimes as another group that's pushing for what's called a Convention of States. And there seems to be considerable controversy both ways. Some are in favor of doing this and some are opposed to it. And so we thought that it would be great if we could work towards getting some education for all of us. We'd like to learn something about both sides and be a little more informed as we talk to our neighbors and as we see people that come up and discuss this with us. And we're certainly trying to record this, and we'll try to make sure that we get as much publicity for this meeting as we possibly can. We'd like to have the meeting kind of go forward as two opening statements, one from Hood Richardson and one from Jeff Lewis. And then after that, we have some questions that the chair here would like to pose to them, and then we'll have some questions from the audience. We'll hold this so that you'll be able to get out of here in about an hour and 15 minutes. So don't get nervous about folks, having a lot of folks up here talking. We'll put the bell on them and make sure we'll get them up and get them down. But we'd like to start by having Hood Richardson to make his opening comments.
Okay, thank you very much. First, let's get some definitions out of the way. There's really no such thing under the Constitution as a constitutional convention. We've already had those. Those were had back in the 1700s. The last one was in 1781. A constitutional convention that we normally talk about and that people like to try to define to throw water on the issue is, gee, we're going to look at the whole Constitution, we're going to rewrite this thing. That is tantamount to revolution. You will never have a constitutional convention if you're following the Constitution of the United States, where everything in the Constitution can be looked at. It's impossible to have it go anywhere, simply because Article 5 blocks it off. We're really talking about a convention of the states under Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States of America. Article 5 of the Constitution sets out how that is to happen. Going against a constitutional convention is the people who are out doing this, who are sowing the seeds of wrath, if you will, against this, really don't want a constitutional convention at all. What they're afraid of it, and they're afraid of the good things that could come out of it. And some of them are just plain afraid of allowing the citizens to make decisions for them. So keep this in mind while we go through this. It's not without risk, however, but there are many, many stopgaps, checks and balances in a convention of the states under Article 5 to consider specific amendments to the Constitution of the United States. I'm going to read Article 5. It's a short article in case you haven't read it lately. I read it a lot lately. The more you read Article 5, at first it's confusing. At first you say, well, gee, they left this out, they left that out, and they left something else out. But it is not confusing after you've read it 4 or 5 times. It's pretty short, and I have to have my glasses to do this. Article 5, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to, specific amendments to the Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states. So there's definition. Shall call a convention for proposing amendments. It says it again. You're proposing amendments. You're not going to rewrite the Constitution. You have to have specific amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when, after it's been ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress of the United States, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses of the 9th section of the first article and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of equal suffrage in the Senate. Well, those exceptions concern the 2008 exception. They concern tariffs and how tariffs are to be applied, and they're saying until until 1808 that you can't change it. You can change it after 1808, and that concerns tariffs and how they're collected for items that are exported from the various states. Got to keep in mind that the first Constitution of the United States, we were to be run based upon levies that were placed on imports and exports, tariffs. We were not to be ruled based on income tax. Was not how we were to be funded, and some of these other kinky things they've come up with. The first and fourth, let's see, one other thing. Oh, and the other big thing that was the rage in those days was the protection of something that, guess what, everybody's forgotten about, states' rights. That's why they said deprived of the suffrage of representation by the Senate. And the reason was there was 2 senators elected from each state by the legislature of the state and sent to Washington, D.C., and the purpose of that was to protect the states' rights. There has been an amendment to the Constitution that all the people get to vote on those senators now. Those senators have forgotten what their charge is, quite frankly. They have become just like the House. They go up there and they have, I doubt if most of them have ever read the Constitution, frankly, or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. So let's look at how this thing works. How do you think the first Constitutional Convention was called? It was the states that sent representatives. The legislatures of the various states elected, sometimes they only sent one person, sometimes they sent a delegation. And it was the delegation that decided with one representative. 5 minutes up?
Yep.
Okay.
My pocket constitution reads a little bit differently on Article 5. But I'm going to say some things tonight that are probably going to upset my dear friend, Commissioner Richardson. We've been working together on a lot of issues over the past 6, 7 years. And when Mr. Cayton asked me about, I initially had talked to him about doing a presentation. And he called me back and asked me, was I willing to do a debate?
It's not really a debate. This is an opportunity to try to get both sides presented for an educational aspect.
That's what a debate is. I didn't say hostile debate. Of all the people that I would rather not debate, is this man, because he's my favorite county commissioner in the country. However, my pocket constitution on Article 5 reads a little different than what he just read, because twice I heard my good friend Hood use the word specific amendments. And nowhere in Article 5 will you find the word specific. The convention, the 2 methods are Congress can propose amendments, or on the application of 2/3 of the state legislatures, Congress would call a convention, and I quote, convention for proposing amendments, plural. There's no specificity required. That's something that's gone on for at least 100 years. Congress not wanting to amend the Constitution, not wanting to allow the second method of amendment to be used, which is conventions, has gerrymandered the process such that they've rejected amendments or applications that weren't for the same subject or the same issue. And the states and the people have bought into that lie, and it's a lie because the text doesn't say it. Thomas Jefferson said, somewhere here, on every question of construction of the Constitution, let us carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or intended against it, conform to the probable one in which it was passed. If the Founding Fathers had wanted to require 2/3 of the states to apply for specific amendments or specific subjects, it would say so. It doesn't. I grew up wondering what happened to the German people, how they got suckered into the National Socialist Party and Hitler. And a gentleman wrote a book in the early 70s who was researching that very issue. And he said if you can get people And he was talking to a German who had lived through it. And the gentleman, kind of like Pastor Niemöller's quote about when they came for the trade unionists, I didn't say anything because I wasn't in the union. When they came to the Jews, I didn't say anything because I wasn't a Jew. This gentleman said, if you can get people asking the wrong questions, the answers don't matter. Commissioner Richardson mentioned fear about the people that are opposed to an Article 5 convention. One of the people that the Convention of States likes to throw out there is George Mason. They said we needed this second method to amend the Constitution in case to rein in an out-of-control government. Well, I've yet to be able to find that text, and it's not in here anywhere. What James Madison said the purpose of it was for, and I quote from Federalist 43, it guards equally against that extreme facility which would render the Constitution too mutable, and that extreme difficulty which might perpetrate its discovered faults. It moreover equally enables the general and the state governments to originate the amendment of errors. Errors. Things in the Constitution that they knew over the course of time, they knew they were men, they weren't perfect, they weren't angels. This was not a perfect document. It was a more perfect union was what they were forming. And they knew that because they were men, that there was a chance they overlooked something. The problem we have today is not the Constitution, it's the people. We're the problem. I've got time left.
16 seconds.
Give it to me.
Oh my God.
All right, we had come up with a few questions that we had offered a little bit ahead of time here to both Jeff and Hood. And we'd like to ask these, and then we'd like to open the floor to everyone else here. And we'd like to try to hold these to about 2 minutes. The first question is, what are the problems we are seeking to resolve by an Article 5 convention?
Well, that's a good question, but it depends on who you ask. The Patriot Coalition has a catalog, and I've got a lot of them here if anybody wants to look at them, nearly 100 proposed amendments that are being floated out there. And they're not all good ones. I know most of you folks are probably conservative, so you probably listen to the conservative talking heads, and they're all on board with this. They're making some good ad revenue promoting it. Hawaii's got an amendment proposal in their application for an Article 5 convention that calls for the repeal of the Second Amendment. They've got another clause in there that calls for making the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, and the individual mandate constitutional. There are NGOs from the left that want to make climate change and carbon credits part of the Constitution. The founder of the head of Convention of States has a parental rights amendment that for the first time would give the government, federal and state, control over your children simply by demonstrating a governmental interest of the highest order that's not otherwise served. That is rendering unto Caesar something that is God's, not Caesar's. He also would like to change our Supreme Court to look like the European Union's Court on Human Rights. There's a lot of good people that are snake oil salesmen that are preying on the misery index of the people and just giving them feel-good rhetoric about what could come out of this convention, but it won't solve the core problem. If people won't uphold the Constitution now, amending it won't make them uphold it either.
Okay, there are a lot of things that can come out of a constitutional convention. Among those, term limits for members of the House and Senate, a redo of the Supreme Court, overruling some of the Supreme Court decisions, like abortion. There can be limits put on taxations, limits on borrowing. That can happen out of a constitutional convention. We can cut them off from borrowing. requiring the government to compensate for property caused by overregulation on their part, showing allowing the states to amend the Constitution. Well, that one, right, allowing the states to amend the Constitution directly, that's cut off. That can't happen. Now, let's go back to amendments. He's given you a list of scary amendments here. Let's just get real practical with this for a minute. 34 states have to petition the Congress for this to happen. That means that you have to, and let's talk about amendments and the fact that you can amend the whole Constitution. You can't do it. Congress is set up there. Every time they're petitioned to amend the Constitution, if, for instance, if you want to do term limits, 34 states have to submit an amendment. Now remember, I said specific. This is getting specific. To amend the Constitution to require term limits. 34 states have to agree to the same subject matter as an item to amend the Constitution. It's not a matter. Some states have petitioned, oh, we just want to amend the Constitution. Well, what do you want to change in it? Well, we don't know, but we want to amend the Constitution. They're not telling you. You can't, Congress is not going to approve a constitutional convention like that. They would if you had 34 states. Do you really think in the majority of these states are conservative, you're going to get 34 states who are going to go in there and ask for a blank check to look at the Constitution again? It's not going to happen. The Constitution, the Article 5 says proposed amendments. They said plural because they didn't want to say an amendment. That meant that you're limited and we could never in the course of history have but one amendment. Read the English language for what it really says.
Did either one of you like to have a rebuttal to that? Or?
Yes, I would. You have to look at the application. And that's what Congress is going to look at, is the application itself. And what was the purpose of the Constitution in the first place but to establish the power and jurisdiction of the federal government? If you look at the Convention of States model application, it's really got 5 things in there, and they all sound and feel good. But the middle one is limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Well, you tell me which article between 1 and 6, because 7 was about ratifying the initial 1787 Constitution, so we can say that was off the table. And you can say Article 5 is. Tell me which other articles are not subject to amendment at such a convention. The convention itself is the deliberative body. What the Convention of States and Compact for America and Citizens Initiatives are trying to propose is that the states circumvent the requirements of Article 5, that the states pre-ratify, essentially, the amendments in their legislatures. It makes the deliberative aspect of a convention merely a formality. That was not what the founders intended. And it doesn't take 34 states for an amendment to come out of a convention. It only takes 26. It takes 34 to trigger a convention. It only takes 26 at the convention to send an amendment back to the states for ratification. And if a warm fuzzy is what you have about that, the majority of the governors in this country are Republican. And the majority of the state's attorney generals are Republican. And they all signed on to unconstitutional lawsuits against Obamacare. North Carolina's General Assembly has a super majority, veto-proof majority. We can't get them to stand up and defend the Constitution against the National Defense Authorization Act. And this is a list of what it violates in the Constitution, including over half the Bill of Rights. I don't trust them. You shouldn't trust them. Yeah, and even if you could, it wouldn't fix the problem.
Okay, that's not rebuttal to his. Look at the protection that's in the words that are in Article 5. Don't listen to what everybody is trying to tell you could happen. Read Article 5 at least 5 times, and you'll see that the protections are there. He just gave you one of the protections. It takes 34 states to make a recommendation to Congress for a specific amendment, subject of an amendment.
No, sir.
It takes half of the states, 51%, if you will, to approve that. There's another protection in here. It goes back to the states themselves, to the legislatures, or if Congress wants to have the states do conventions, they can do conventions. for the final approval. Look at the checks you've got in this. You got to have specific. There's that key word, specific. It says amendments. It doesn't say change the Constitution. It doesn't say we're going to open up the whole Constitution. It says if you want to amend it. If you go through this book, you'll find that each one of these amendments to the Constitution is specific. It has a specific number and a specific subject matter. So 34 states have to decide what they want to change. Then you have the convention, you do the refinement. The words that are in Article 5, the reason I implore you to read it word for word and study the words that are in here is that after the convention approved what they wanted to do so far as an article went, it then went to a committee of refinement. What is a committee of refinement? Committee of refinement looked at the words. They dealt with each word in there to make sure that they were writing the words and conveying the meaning that they wanted to convey. If you read Article 5 over and over again, you'll come to realize that specific amendments have to be made. It doesn't say propose a new constitution. If they wanted to propose a new constitution, Article 5 would say, you can come and propose a new constitution. It doesn't say that. It says you can amend the existing document.
Okay, we really did not identify many of the problems, but some of the problems that the article would approach. But let's say that there are things out there, obviously, that people would like to have a convention in order to correct or improve in their minds. So how will an Article 5 convention resolve those problems that people are concerned about?
It won't. Until we the people, and this group of people is probably doing it as good as any group in the country that's trying to elect good people that know the Constitution. The founders of the Beaufort Patriot Tea Party have been teaching the Miracle of America course on the Constitution here for 20 years, trying to educate the people and the public servants about what this document reads. You've tried to elect good people and hold their feet to the fire when they don't keep their oath. And that's what everybody needs to do. There's no microwave solution to our problems. And again, I have to go back because I keep hearing this word that's not in Article 5. Please read Article 5. You won't find anything in there about specific. You won't find anything in there that requires the states to be, you could have 34 states that want a convention for different reasons. There's nothing in there that says they have to, in their application, that they have to apply for a specific issue, a specific amendment. All they have to apply is for Congress to call a convention for proposing amendments. No specificity required. And you only need 26 once the convention is convened to pass any amendment that is proposed at the convention.
Okay, I'll go back to Article 5 itself. It says both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution. And I'll go back to this. If you can't get 34 states to agree on the subject of the amendment to the Constitution, you're not going to have a Constitution. This thing does not say that you can have a convention to write a new Constitution. It says you can amend the existing Constitution. Read exactly what it says, and when you do, you propose amendments. If you're going to propose a new Constitution, then you get out your guns and start fighting, because that is a major item. We're proposing amendments. You have to submit those to Congress. And if you look at history, there have been over 700 different proposals that have been made by states to Congress over the years. You have not had a single Constitution convention of the states on Article 5. And why? Nobody has ever come up with 34 states, it would be 34 today, 34 states that are saying the same subject matter we want to change. So Congress has never approved it. Now, Congress, as far as how it solves some of our problems, part of the answer to this is Congress has acted on has passed 4 amendments to the Constitution. And those were amendments that Congress said it's better for us to do this than to have a convention, because we don't know what might come out of a convention. And we have 4 amendments to the Constitution. And I'm looking for them right now. I don't know whether we'll find them or not. But they all happened, for the most part, in the 20th century. So, and if when I find them, I'll read them to you on another rebuttal. But how you solve the problem is when Congress sees the big bulldozer coming at them, they fix it themselves. And until you can get enough states together that want to, for instance, on term limits, if you can get enough states together that want to fix term limits, what do you think Congress is going to do? You think they're going to let a convention fix their case? No, they're going to propose an amendment and they're going to see it through.
Could I,
Sure.
if me and Hood were at the convention, I think y'all could go home and sleep good tonight. But we won't be there, odds are. And the Patriot Coalition has never said that the purpose, that why we're opposed to this is because we're worried about them rewriting a new, or writing a new constitution. The communications director, Jordan Silers, for a convention of states, your communications director, your job is to communicate. And I quote, I think the majority of Americans are too lazy to elect honest politicians, but I think some men and women could be found who are morally and intellectually capable of rewriting the Constitution. Those aren't my words. Those are the people who want an Article 5 convention. It's not me.
Tell me what's coming up. Are we getting a new question, or are we
Yeah,
rebutting this one?
Number 3, who is behind an Article 5 convention now? Who's pushing for it?
I can speak to that.
Go ahead. Go right ahead.
That's a long list of folks, but it started back in the early 60s with the Ford Foundation. They spent $10 million, $10 million, gathered over 100 academics together over a 10-year span, and they came up with the new state's Constitution for America. It does away with states, it creates regional governance, which is a component of sustainable development and Agenda 21. The Rockefeller Foundation has been involved in this push to try and do away with our Constitution and Bill of Rights since the 30s. Rex Tugwell headed up this effort by the Ford Foundation. If you don't remember Rex Tugwell, he was the head of Roosevelt's Brain Trust, FDR's. There's 3 major factions promoting an Article 5 convention. Convention of States, which has is calling for a unlimited convention, even though they're calling it a limited convention. Compact for America, which is wanting to do a specific one-day convention, fly in, vote, fly out, just rubber stamp, using a compact, which is in direct violation of Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, because they can't do an interstate compact without Congress's stamp of approval. And then there's citizens' initiatives headed up by Charles Kaprowitz, who wants to do specific amendments conventions, and they've got about 18 to 20 amendments, each of these organizations that they're wanting to propose. And any of these balanced budget amendment proposals that I've seen, not one of them puts the federal government back in the enumerated powers box. We wouldn't have a national debt, we wouldn't have a spending problem if we would constrain Congress and the federal government to only spend monies on what's in Article 1, Section 8.
Well, I think you're right, Jeff. I don't disagree with you on the people that are pushing these things. But I want to go back to this. There are radicals out there everywhere. Just because someone is pushing something and trying to make you believe something is true, and that's why the Ford Foundation had to spend $10 million, is because they weren't trying to follow the Constitution, were they? Article 5 that I read to you, there's nothing in Article 5 that even talks about what these radical groups want to do. This is the scariness that comes. People get scared when they see the radical groups who are pushing their own little plan to try to change government in the United States. I ask you to go back to Article 5 of the Constitution and see what it says. It says when 2/3 of the states propose amendments to Congress that you can have an Article 5 convention. And it says propose amendments. I don't think that you have enough people in the United States or of states that would propose a new constitutional convention without specifying the amendments. And I think it would go to the Supreme Court, Congress would send it to the Supreme Court, and you still have to know what you're talking about. because it is nothing but radicalism to walk in, swagger, and say we're going to change the Constitution. Nobody is dumb enough to do something like this. You have to be specific in what you want to change, and you need 34 more states. And as you approach 34 states that want to have term limits, then what you're going to find out is Congress is going to get ahead of you, and they're going to change it. And that's how this works. The people who are afraid of a constitutional convention simply don't understand how it really works. This is why on 4 occasions that I can't find here, Congress, well, liquor was one of them. I remember that. There were 2 of them that involved liquor. One of them was there would be no more liquor, and the abolition of whiskey, and the other one was to put it back in.
It was the 18th and 21st.
Right, that's right, 18th and 21st. And Congress decided they would change it rather than having a convention change it. You know, the same thing will happen again.
Actually, conventions repealed the 21st, or repealed the 18th Amendment, because the states didn't want to have the responsibility to turn the beer taps back on. So that's the one time that Congress chose option 2 on ratification, was the repeal of prohibition.
Would you like to move on to the next one?
Sure.
Sure. Who will select the delegates, and how will the voting be conducted? One state, one vote, or apportioned by population?
You want me to go? Well, take a look at the model. The reason, look at the simplicity of Congress. You have all these bills now that take 3,000 words and 20,000 words to write it. Why is that? Crooks are writing them. Laws need to be simple. People's special interests are getting their fingers into that pie, and that's what's going on with that. Congress went far out of their way to write as simple of a constitution as they could. Why? To keep people from misinterpreting it. And with the few words that are in Article 5, you've already seen tonight that people are trying to distort it all over the place for various different reasons. Mostly not to have a constitutional convention. What I'm telling you is you're not going to have a constitutional convention, because Congress will fix it if you start pushing them hard enough. What was the question again?
Okay, the question here was who will select the delegates?
Oh, who will select the delegates? That's what I started off with. Look at the simplicity of the document. Who selected the delegates for the first convention? Each state was sovereign unto itself. So who selected them? The government of the state selected them. And your legislature is going to select them again this time. So it may not be, as Jeff says, he and I won't be there. It may not be the people that you want to go, but the legislature is going to send them, and they can send one person, or they can send 5 or 6 as a delegation. Same thing happened on the first Constitutional Convention. Congress, in its simplicity, for these people who were really brilliant, didn't feel like it was necessary to invade the sovereignty of a state to tell them how to do this. We've had government in North America since about 1600, believe it or not. We had committees of safety from the time the British were driven out in the early 1700s until the final Constitution was passed and we started having elections again. Committees of safety represented the executive, the judicial, and the legislative. So we've had government all this time. We have managed to govern ourselves, and Congress believed that the individual states should govern themselves. Go back to states' rights. They are infinitely important, and they need to be returned to us. And we can get them back by using the Constitution.
That's an interesting question as to who would select the delegates, and depending on who you ask and when you ask them, you'll get different answers. The alleged guru on Article 5, Professor Rob Nadelson, who's a senior fellow on constitutional jurisprudence at the Independence Institute, he wrote the ALEC Handbook on Article 5 for state legislators. And in that, he said, as incidents to its power to propose amendments, the convention may establish its own rules, elect its own officers, determine where it continues to sit, fix the hours of sitting, judge the credentials of members, and otherwise oversee housekeeping. If the convention wishes to alter the one state, one vote rule, it may do so. on page 15 of the ALEC handbook. And Mr. Nelson was the prime source for Mark Levin's Liberty Amendments book. On page 15 of the ALEC, that's the American Legislative Exchange Council handbook, the Article 5 handbook, Professor Nelson said, interstate conventions always have determined issues according to a one state, one vote rule, although a convention is free to change the rule of suffrage. On page 16, he says, initial suffrage is one state, one vote, with decisions made by a majority of states, but the convention may change both rules. North Carolina legislature, United States Congress, they write their own rules. You want to talk about history and precedent? A deliberative body makes its own rules. Any of y'all that are familiar with Robert's rules knows that once a convention or a conference convenes, that's the body that makes the rules. Supreme Court has confirmed that. But when Mr. Nelson is talking to Joe and Jane Citizen, he says what Mr. Ferris says, one state, one vote. They're telling legislators one thing, they're telling the public something different. And it's undecided.
Let's go back to the precedent in this. The people that are afraid of this are dredging up all of these horrible things. The precedent is that the states picked the representatives to go, and they picked either one or they picked a committee to go. We're going to do the same thing again. There's a precedent in this. It's right there. The writers of this Constitution wrote it in simple English, as simple as they could write it. Why? Constitutional lawyers is why. If you want to see a worthless human being as a lawyer, let him call himself a constitutional lawyer. And the reason he does that is because he doesn't know any law about anything for that matter, and he certainly doesn't know the Constitution. The gentleman that he is referring to is deliberately stirring the pot to confusion. The founders of the Constitution intended that every citizen of the United States of America be a constitutional lawyer. We are a free country. We are a democracy. We have individual and personal rights, and they're amplified in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. So you are as much of an expert on the Constitution as any law professor anywhere. Amen. What about Obama? Look at what he taught constitutional law. That's your prime example. Franklin Roosevelt was a lawyer. Look at what he did to the Constitution. Lincoln was a lawyer. Look at what he did to the Constitution. Look at all these people that were supposedly experts on the Constitution. What I'm telling you is you're the expert on the Constitution because you rank higher than anybody else. You're a citizen of the United States of America. And that gives you a right to pick this book up and read it and see what you think. Don't sit around and wait on some expert to tell you, because the people that wrote it, it's a short document. The people that wrote it had a committee that chose words. It was that important so that the average man on the street could pick it up and read it and understand it.
I agree with Commissioner Richardson on that. The Constitution was written for the average voter, for the average citizen. If you need an attorney to interpret it for you, you probably had a public education. Because the dumbing down of America, they've quit teaching our founding documents. They've quit teaching civic responsibility.
He's right.
But I will, in defense of my general counsel, he is a constitutional attorney, but he's practicing what the Constitution says as a citizen first and applying the law to it second. They're not all bad. And the constitutional attorney he was referring to wasn't ours. It's the Convention of States experts. They're constitutional attorneys. And they are snakes. That's why we call it a convention of snakes. And that's what you'll end up with.
All right, we had the next one is, has an Article 5 convention been suggested before?
Depending on who you ask, between 400 and 700 times. If you want to go look at all of them, you can go to FOABC, Friends of Article 5 Convention, so FOABC.org, and they've actually cataloged all those applications. Mr. Nadelson likes to say that there has been one done before, the Washington Peace Conference in 1861. where about 5 states got together and tried to find a way to avoid the Civil War. They were not successful. But if you can go online and search for it under Rob Adelson, where he says a convention of states to propose amendments to the Constitution has been done. It's been done before. Is how the article starts. It's not been done before. There's never been an Article 5 convention, and even George Mason, who they like to cite, not the commissioner, but the proponents of it, like to cite George Mason as saying that the reason they stuck with the second method to amend the Constitution in Article 5 was to rein in an out-of-control government. Even he said it was exceptional and dangerous.
Oh, well, I go to the use of the Article 5 Constitution. That's the real power in the Article 5 Constitution, is the threat from the people. And you've seen this with these 4 amendments that have been made to the Constitution. Let's look at it from a purely political standpoint. You're sitting up there in Washington, D.C., and you're elected. And here comes 34 states and says, man, we're going to put term limits in. And you're sitting up there. By this time, you're terrified for the first time in your political life. Somebody's getting ready to cut you off big time. What are you going to do? You're going to get Congress together, and they can amend the Constitution. They have to send it to the states. And what are they going to do? They're going to make it sound as close as they can, like what the majority of the public wants, and they're going to send it out to the states, and it's going to go through pretty fast when it comes that way. The threat of a constitutional convention is the power in this. And the people who are out telling you to run from a constitutional convention don't read English like I read English. Read this. Don't listen to what these experts are telling you. Don't listen to what everybody's telling you about this. Read it. See what it says. It says 2/3 of the states propose amendments. It doesn't say do a new constitution. And who are you going to be sending up there? You think there's not going to be a powerful political fight in every one of these states about who goes to the Constitutional Convention? You better believe there's going to be. This is going to be a big deal. And you think the Congress of the United States is not afraid of this? They are. You don't have to actually have the Constitution to make your point and get things changed. But until you provide the threat that is real, nothing is going to happen. And these morons sitting up there know this. They are not threatened by anybody or anything. Article 5 is the only threat that you have. Let's get together and propose the amendments. By the time you get 30 states on board, I guarantee you Congress is going to be moving. And it's one vote for one state. That's the way the original convention was held. Look at the precedent. The precedent will carry the day.
Okay, the next question is, are there, and we've been covering a good bit of this already, but if you'd like to touch on it a little bit more, we can. Because question 6 was, are there any risk to an Article 5 convention? And I think you've hit most of those, but if you want to talk about some more of those, we certainly can.
Well, you want to talk?
Russian roulette. You got one bullet chamber, an Article 5 convention, and this day is one chamber empty.
Well, I think the protections are there in Article 5. Keep in mind, 2/3 of the states have to propose an amendment. And there's that evil word again, specific. It's got to be specific, otherwise, if you say, one state says, I want to change the color of apples, and the other one says, I like oranges, and the other one says, I like bananas, and you send this to Congress as a petition for a constitutional convention, you've got a petition for 3 different constitutional conventions. And they're not going to approve it. They're going to say, when you get 34 states that like bananas, we'll approve one for bananas. That's how that works. It's all right here in this. Propose amendments, not propose a new constitution. And the convention, when the convention meets, sure, they can talk about anything they want to, but those states have given their delegation orders when they leave about what they're supposed to do. And whatever they decide, they can only take up the amendments to bring back to the states for approval. And the states have to approve them. 3/4 of the states have to approve them. The checks and balances are there. There is no risk in this. Now, I agree if you're looking at all the bad guys out there and you're looking at all the weathermen and all of these weird groups, political activity that go around killing people, most of those people are not going to be there. They are simply not going to be there. The state legislatures are going to be protective of their states and who they send. They're not going out on the street and find some wino and send him. It doesn't work that way.
Would you trust Speaker Tillis at such a convention?
I don't know that he would be going.
Thank you.
Another good question we have is, would amending the Constitution result in the federal government obeying the Constitution any more than it does now?
No. The Convention of States says, and I quote, when the founders wrote the Constitution, they did not anticipate modern-day politicians who take advantage of loopholes and vague phraseology. When you go to Elliott's debates at the Library of Congress and you read the minutes from the Philadelphia Convention and from the Ratification Convention, and then come back and tell me that the founding fathers didn't anticipate politicians taking advantage of loopholes and vague phraseology, it's absurd. They say even though the federal violation of the Constitution is obvious to all reasonable Americans, Washington pretends otherwise, claiming the Constitution contains broad and flexible language. Well, I would posit that Raleigh feels the same way. They say that we should trust state legislatures to rein in an out-of-control federal government. That's like asking the wolf to take the fox's place watching the hen house. It defies common sense that state legislators who don't understand the Constitution are going to be wise enough and learned enough to select delegates other than our Speaker, to go to a convention on behalf of North Carolina and propose amendments or to deliberate and debate amendments and keep our God-given inalienable rights at the forefront of what they're protecting. It's a pipe dream, and it won't make them uphold it.
Okay. Well, you know, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights will never be any better than the character of the people who are entrusted with them. That is why in this world, honest men are truly dangerous. You need to keep that in mind. Now, the way this thing works, you hear a lot about nullification. Nullification is a good idea. It's the 10th Amendment, and what it says is all the powers that are not given in this document, in the Constitution, if it's not enumerated here, it belongs to the states or to the people. But the problem with nullification is it's just like anything else. If I go take that camera away from Delma Blimson and he just sits there, I own the camera. He has to do something to stop the bad guy. And the way nullification works is, Arizona is a good example. The federal government sued Arizona. Did any other states come to their aid in this? And maybe one or two, but not very much. So Arizona tried a form of nullification and they got sued by the federal government. What needs to happen on this is a political outcry to make nullification work. And it will work, but it has to be challenged in court to be successful, and the state has to win. And that's why nullification, while it's a great idea, if you go out and do something and the federal government's not interested in it, that item will stand. But if the federal government wants to come after you, they will. Problem is, these lawyers and these judges don't read the Constitution. If they read the Constitution and followed it, decisions having to do with Arizona and states' rights are real easy. But not enough states are willing to fight for it. That's why 34 states can call a constitutional convention, and we can get things changed. You have to challenge the bad guys in order to get it to work. There are a lot of other things that happen where the federal government have come into states and forced laws on the states that are not in the Constitution. And because the states are weak, they have let it pass. And because the Chief Justices to the Supreme Court have never read the Constitution, states don't bother to bring it to them.
Arizona, in the lawsuit he's referring to, was over SB 1070. And rather than uphold not Article 5, But Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause, and Article 6, Clause 3, the Oath of Office, that includes state legislators, state executives. They should have told Eric Holder when he filed that lawsuit to pack sand, to come back when if he had a problem with Arizona, to file his lawsuit in a court that has constitutional authority to hear it. And there's only one. Alexander Hamilton said in Federalist 81, it would ill-suit the dignity of the state to have its grievances heard in an inferior tribunal. 26, 27, mostly Republican state attorneys general joined the Florida lawsuit, also in the lowest federal district court. I'd say the fear is states are afraid to uphold Article 6, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, Article 4. Article 5 is a cop-out for not having done their job and for refusing on an ongoing basis to do their job and keep their oath. They are a majority are oath breakers, and they need to be oath keepers. Governor Vance, on October 21st, 1876 said, when you find you have scoundrels and scallywags in office, you need to turn them out. And you need to keep turning them out until you send honorable men to Washington. Well, that applies to Raleigh. It applies to Beaufort County, the original Washington. It starts at the bottom.
Okay, we'd like to open time now to the audience. And if you have questions, if anyone has questions that they'd like to offer, we'd be happy to entertain those now.
This one's probably off the subject, but you hear about all these people that are outraged about Mr. Obama's executive actions in various departments. And they say, well, I don't have standing. I can't sue. I can't get it in the court. Is that true? I mean, what do you have to standing to bring a suit to stop it? I haven't got a straight answer from Fox. I know that.
I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to try and answer that one. Generally, from what I understand, though, is that to have standing, you have to be able to demonstrate that you were personally affected by the law in question or by the policy or regulation adversely affected, and generally uniquely so. Now, sometimes you'll see a delegate standing in class action status when a whole bunch of people get on board with the lawsuit. But if the states won't do their part to uphold the Constitution, it doesn't matter what you change. Raleigh is generally, and I use Raleigh as an example because this is where I live, it's like prep school for Washington. I mean, do you think people in Raleigh that are at have reached the pinnacle of the political ladder in North Carolina's legislature would want to set term limits on Congress, knowing some of them that's where they want to go next? And don't we already have term limits in the House of Representatives? Every 2 years we get an opportunity to throw the bombs out. And every 6 years in the Senate. And we choose not to. So if we're going to send scumbags to Washington or to Raleigh, it doesn't matter whether they get to be scumbags for 1 term or for 20 terms. We're the problem.
Well, I think, to go at that same question, I think Jeff's getting, I agree with what he said earlier. You know, good government begins right here in Beaufort County at the county commissioner level. And a lot of people descend on me when I say things like that, but this is where good government does begin. The demands have to be made up the line, and we're going to have honesty, and we're going to have fairness, and we're going to do our jobs. Otherwise, the bad guys win, because if the bad guy's doing something and you don't challenge him, then he's successful. There's no challenge to this. In the case of the executive orders that President Obama is writing to run the government, he's getting away with that because his check and balance under our constitutional system, he is the executive. He only runs the government, that the House and the Senate pass the laws and tell him what to do. That's the way it's supposed to work. But when you get both of the House and the Senate right now are between the two of them are, if you will, muscle bound, locked up, Mexican standoff, whatever you want to call it. That gives the president a free hand to do whatever he wants to do, because nobody is going to challenge him and pass a law and say you can't do that. He has no supervision, and he knows this, and he's using it to the fullest extent that he can use it to. An honorable person who had not taught constitutional law would not do that. The honor of the elected people that we elect is a serious problem in the United States. Look at your elected officials. Look at some of the things they do. Apply the simple Hood-Richardson test. Ask them, how does this law apply to the Constitution of the United States? And if they tell you it doesn't apply, you don't need to ever vote for them for anything, because they don't know what they're doing. They're not following the Constitution to begin with, and they're all sworn to follow it. So Jeff has landed on the real problem. You have to demand these people do the right thing. And those can be real bloody fights, because I've fought a bunch of them myself. And people get mad at you for doing these things. But they are worth fighting if you understand the Constitution and you want a constitutional form of government. Being a nice guy is not what it's about. Doing the right thing and following the Constitution is.
And y'all have stood at times behind Hood, and sometimes you've had to stand in front of it. And we need to do the same thing with our congressmen, with our state legislators, whether it's the representative or like Senator Cook. When we're not holding his feet to the fire, sometimes we need to just to give them some courage, because that's what's missing. Faith and courage. If we have faith, the good Lord will give us the courage to do what's right. And that's what we need to do. It all comes down to allegiance and protection. And if you're not familiar with it, it was mentioned at least 3 times by the Apostle Paul. It's mentioned 3 times in the Declaration of Independence. It's the allegiance that you refer to when you say, I pledge allegiance to the flag. It's been recognized by the Supreme Court in numerous cases. We have a mutual relationship between we the people and the people we elect. And we owe them an allegiance and a protection, and it goes both ways. Nullification is not the answer. The only constitutional nullification is not found in the 10th Amendment. It's in Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause. It says only those laws which were written in pursuance thereof are the supreme law of the land. So when you could repeal the Bill of Rights, and it wouldn't change anything, because our rights didn't come from man. Our rights come from God.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our North Carolina General Assembly in 2013 addressed this issue and took a vote on it. So, and
Which issue? Which
the
issue?
Constitutional Convention.
Well, the House has, it passed out of the House, but there are those opposing, trying to stall it in the Senate. And the resolution that was adopted by the House called for rescinding the 2 outstanding applications calling for an Article 5 convention that North Carolina has on the table. Yes, sir. There are those who you will see the Convention of States application be introduced, if not in this short session, at the beginning of the next long session. Because some of those members from the North Carolina legislature were at Mount Vernon on Pearl Harbor Day, meeting with about 100 other legislators from across the country, plotting and planning how to pull this off.
I might be wrong, but I think our North Carolina General Assembly said they were not interested in a constitutional convention.
I think the Senate did. I haven't followed this closely.
The vote in the House, I think, was 106. I believe it was 106, if I remember correctly, against it. And there's only 120 members in the House.
I know the word was coming down from Raleigh from several prominent leaders that states' rights didn't mean anything anymore, and the best thing you could do is shut up and not make trouble with this thing. I mean, those people need to be punished severely.
Anybody that supports an Article 5 convention in Raleigh needs to be thrown out.
No.
Yeah.
That's the club. The club is the Article 5 convention, because the proof is in the tasting. You've never had an Article 5 convention, and you never will. If you get enough states together, they'll change it for you and you'll never get there.
Question?
I would just like to say that when the states went in 1787, Philadelphia, they went to amend the Articles of Confederation. They didn't go to form a new government. That's what they did. And
That's
it turned out
correct.
to be good.
They amended their existing constitution.
No, they changed it.
What's the difference? Here we are playing on words again.
The question she had was for the recordings, that the delegates that went to the 1787 Philadelphia Convention went there to amend the Articles of Confederation and did something different. The call of the convention from Congress says, and I quote, "for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation," end quote. Now, that's a rabbit hole discussion that's irrelevant today. And it's irrelevant today because amending the Constitution won't solve the problems we have. But the way I'm trying to look at it at the 1787 convention is that they went there, most of them, with the intentions of trying to fix the articles and found that they couldn't. And while they were there, since they were already there, had their powdered wigs and their ruffled shirts already on and the windows boarded up, instead they set about writing a new constitution that was sent back. It did follow the tenets of Article 13 of the Articles of Confederation, but they certainly didn't revise the articles. They did. If you read the minutes of the Philadelphia Convention, it starts right out with them establishing committees to draft a new one. But I like what they did. I just don't trust the people today. There's not, as Phyllis Schlafly from Eagle Forum says, there's not many James Madisons, Thomas Jeffersons, and John Adams around these days in government. Yes, ma'am.
One more thing. You know, I've always wanted the 14th, 16th, and 17th amendments repealed. If we have a constitutional convention, if we just do that, we'll be fine. That's all you need to do.
That's one of the first things that I remember when I met you, was you talking about repealing the 16th and 17th amendments. And if the state governments and the state legislatures were serious about restoring state sovereignty and states' rights, that's the only amendment they would need, is to repeal the 17th. Then they could resume their seat at the table in the United States Senate. And there wouldn't be any more bad legislation coming out that was bad for the states. And they could work with the members of the House to repeal, as sunset, some of these unconstitutional programs, repeal a lot of bad laws. But the states don't want the authority. They don't want the responsibility of what's going on in Washington. They don't want. They like it now where they can throw their hands up and say, "It's not us. It's Washington."
And if the 16th were repealed, all of these unconstitutional, what are they called? Even the EPA, the education, regulatory agencies would cease to be because there would be no money to fund them. And they're all unconstitutional.
Guys, in order to get there, you got to understand Article 5, and you got to make it work for you. Now, other than that, you get a gun. You know, this is a bloodless revolution right here in Article 5 that our leadership has given us. The only other way is with a gun.
Mr. Wilson.
My problem is, it ain't with all 5 limited to the people who run this stuff today. Republicans, Democrats, but also Republicans. They don't stand up for the people of this nation, for the Constitution, for God, and lift me up to right when we have the opportunity to use the speech. The people in power with money, all in the same way. They hate America, they hate God, they hate everything we stand for. They're not going to go with that, what we're supposed to do, that to have that thing. They're going to be just what they need to do. It's going to be people that are appointed by these same same type of people that's gonna be there. You're not gonna have to do with, he's not having to do with I am. If we try to say the other fools, if you had it, they will completely wipe every right we have off the book. And that's what's gonna happen. Because the evil, wicked men and women that run the show. And you're not gonna
Madison said,
convention. That is the reason it's a bad idea.
Madison said that this form of government, this constitutional republic, would only work for a moral and religious people, that it was totally unsuitable for any other.
I mean, I didn't believe in saying things like this. It's not going to work like you think. It's going to work like they want to work. They will completely skull this Constitution, which they've already done without even having it. They go by not at all. They don't care nothing about it. And I include the heads of the Republican Party. Amen. Every candidate for president we've had, at least since Ronald Reagan, has been nothing more but a one-world globalist type person. Well, the one that didn't just like the Lord. Now, you like it or not, that's just the absolute truth. They're wicked, they hate you, they hate me, we believe in God and the Constitution. There's no way to it. And so you have this thing, you've gone as a nation. We owe you.
I do think it's playing chicken.
Have any other questions? If not, we'll allow our speakers here to have 5 minutes each as closing remarks.
I don't think I can do 5 minutes.
I don't need 5.
Just take what you need.
Although if you get me started.
You might do it anyway, huh?
Something Hood mentioned earlier, and it is at the core of a misunderstanding. How many times did the founders use the term nullify or nullification or any variation of that word in the Virginia, Kentucky resolutions, Madison's report on nullification in 1800, and I'm not counting the word in the title, or in the 85 essays of the Federalist Papers? How many times did they use the word or variation of the word nullify? Once. How many times did they use the word interpose or interposition? 25. And they understood allegiance and protection. And the duty to interpose is to get in between we the people and a rogue federal government. And until the state of North Carolina or any other state government grows a backbone, or we send people there that have a backbone, until they're willing to stand in between, to interpose the state in between we the people and a rogue federal government, our rights are going to be in jeopardy. Our liberties, our freedoms, everything that we were brought up to believe was important and worth fighting and dying for is in jeopardy. And we have to take an individual responsibility in this. We can't pass it off to constitutional scholars and eggheads in Ivy League ivory towers. They want us to, they've advocated us or absolved us of any responsibility. They tell us it's not our fault. They say we've seen good people in Washington and something happens to them when they get there. If we elected people that had character and integrity in the first place, it wouldn't matter what they threw at them in Washington. That's right. They still have their integrity and their character. So obviously, we're not doing a good enough job of vetting candidates. Some of you were in the Pitt County Courthouse in the last election cycle during a candidates forum, and you probably heard me stand up and say, after listening to an hour's worth of warm, fuzzy garbage, I finally stood up and said to the candidates, I don't care how you feel about anything. I care about one thing. Will you keep your oath? That's it. I mean, I want you to be a good person. I want you to have a brain in your head, some morals. But at the end of the day, if you keep your oath, things will be a lot better. I do have one more thing, since he told me I had 5. Just use your common sense. Forget this. Forget all you've heard tonight. If people won't obey the 10 Commandments, – should we amend them? If your spouse cheats on you, Would you consider amending your marriage vows as a solution? If public servants won't uphold the Constitution, why is amending it the solution? It defies common sense. It's not the solution because they've identified the wrong problem. There's a lot of bad people salivating to get their hands on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Please don't help them do that. Thank you.
Well, I don't really disagree with anything that Jeff has said, but the problem is, are you going to sit here in the cesspool that you're in right now and warm it up a little bit and get comfortable and just keep right on doing what you're doing? Is that what you want? That sounds to me like that's what a lot of people want. And they're using these radicals who don't have a seat at the table, or never going to have a seat at the table, as excuses for not doing anything. There are a lot of things that can be done. The only thing that you have other than armed insurrection is this right here, the Constitution. Go to it and read it. Article 5 is very important in this day and time, simply because government is off the tracks. You can say that you're going to fix it with people and individuals. I'm in politics. I deal with people all the time. I know how spineless elected officials can be. I see the games that are played. Unless you're willing to hold their feet to the fire, they're going to be out wheeling and dealing and doing side deals and all sorts of other things. You do need to amend your marriage vows when they get out of line. Unlike what Jeff said, you do need to make changes and fix them. I look at everybody in here, I think they've all been married. If you think you started out, if you think you got the same set of rules now that you had when you were first married, you're wrong.
Your marriage vows are not a living document, neither is this.
They have to be amended on occasion. No question. The rules have to be, the basics, I agree with Jeff, the basics are given to us as rights from God. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to make changes on occasion because of conditions, situations, or whatever. The only thing that you have, you can take what every expert in the world tells you, you can take what I tell you. The only thing that you have is this Constitution. Go to it and read it. If you're interested in following the Constitution, you need to get it out and read it, and you need to start talking to your elected officials about the Constitution and about following it. And the club in all of this, I think I've shown you, is the threat to your elected officials in Washington, D.C. that comes from a constitutional convention. If you don't threaten them that you're going to make changes in the way they live, they're going to keep doing exactly what they're doing right now. And you know what they're doing now. They're taking advantage of you. They're doing what they want to. They're making up the rules as they go. So it's up to you to either wallow in what you're in or try to change it. This is the rule book right here. Listen to all those other experts out there you want to. Constitutional lawyers, when you see one coming, run. They're useless. This document was written for the average person to understand. It was written deliberately by the founding fathers. Why? So some genius expert couldn't tell you what to think. You know, it took me a long time to figure out the constitutional lawyers didn't know very much. It took me, I'm 73 years old, and most decisions that come down from courts today are political decisions. They are not made based on the law. They are not made based on what is right and wrong. They are political decisions. Look at what Justice Roberts did to us, a supposed conservative, when he sold us out on Obamacare. He's a sorry, sorry, sorry judge. And he should resign for what he did because he didn't understand the Constitution. You need to call these people to account. You need to talk to your elected officials about the Constitution. If you put enough pressure on them and mention it often enough, he might suddenly get the bright idea, maybe he needs to find this, whatever it is, and read it. Because they do make interest in reading. I don't claim to be an expert. I just claim to be knowledgeable about the purpose of the document and what it's for and how it should be used. And politically, the hammer is in your hand, and it comes down to leadership and character. And you're right, there are not very many James Madisons out there, Thomas Jeffersons, and the people that wrote this thing. There are not very many of them in positions that they can do anything to help you. Because we're living, if the truth of the matter, if you turn your television set on and look at it, we're living in a land of evil. No question about it. You need to get out the book of Isaiah and read that. And you're going to see what's ultimately going to happen if we don't change this thing. Because sooner or later, and the experts will all tell you the same thing, it's going to happen. We just can't tell you when. But it's going to happen. We need to be pushing our leadership. You notice that certain local leaders, I'm not going to call them, get very conservative around election time. They vote the right way. And as soon as that election's over, it's back to the races again. Same old stuff all over again.
If I could, just one more minute. I gave a handout that's an Article 5 resource document, and you'll notice it's not one-sided. We provided the links to our opposition on this, the Convention of States, Citizens Initiatives, the People's Convention, Compact for America, and others, because we want you to see both sides of the arguments. We want you to make, as Jefferson said, we're trying to inform your discretion. At the very bottom, in the footer of that Article 5 resource document, is a link to that document. So you don't have to type any of those links in, just type that one, and you'll have the 2-page resource document where you can just click on any of the articles or the links. There's videos, there's PowerPoints. Please visit defendnotamend.com. defendnotamend.com. We have a lot of information there and more coming. And also, if you would visit theintolerableacts.org and the Patriot Coalition. And if you find something that we've got wrong, do let us know, because our goal is to get it right. Thank you.
All right. We'd like to offer we have run out of time, but we did want to make one exception. I know that Keith is in the middle of tax season, and so he got here for a second late. We did give one of our commissioners, candidate commissioners, 2 minutes, and if you'd like to just say who you are and tell us who you are, that'd be great.
There was a gentleman here that had a question.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, that's probably what he wanted. For anybody that would like my contact information, my business cards are out on the table outside the door, and I've got some more over here, and here's some extras, the resource documents, if anybody wants one that didn't get one.
I'll tell you, this guy does a lot of really good work. He puts a lot of time into what he does, not just on the constitutional issues we're talking about, on immigration and other issues that are vital to this country. He's very dedicated. He puts a lot of time into this, and I have a lot of respect for the work he does.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, my name is Keith Kidwell, candidate for County Commissioner. I'd like to thank these gentlemen for enlightening us here this evening in reference to the Constitution. It's something I hold very near and dear to my heart. Keep both the federal and North Carolina Constitution with me. I've used it as a back down there at the county commissioners meetings on many occasions, letting them know that they are in dire violation of that document. The problem I see that we have, folks, and this is something I've talked about time and again, is I will use the Constitution as the yardstick by which any bill that comes to me will be judged. That I can tell you without any wavering whatsoever. A lot of you here know me, and I am a man of my word. And I will stand for your Constitution, regardless of what anybody else wants to dangle in front of me to try and make me go otherwise. It's not going to happen. As far as amending our Constitution goes, there's times that does happen. I would suggest let's elect candidates who are going to abide by the current rules we have. Because if you put more ink on more paper, what's going to make them adhere to those rules? They're not adhering to what we have now. Take those people, cast your ballot, use the back of the ballot box to tell them you're not going to put up with this anymore. That's how you're going to change this. They're violating our rights time and time again. They're passing laws that are doing away with traditional marriage, using the Supreme Court and legislating from the courts. They did that with abortion. They're trying to do that with your Second Amendment right. And by God, I'll tell you, you try and come get my gun, the first guy through the door is going to die. I don't know what happens after that, but number one's had.
They have to get here to my house first.
That's right. Larry and I be there together, back to back. That's what I'm going to tell you as a candidate for the Beaufort County Commission. The Constitution is the guideline for all the premise of government. I believe that, and I will stand by that. I ask for your vote.
And his brother, Proctor, is the current chairman of the Beaufort County Committee for Constitutional Studies. So if he doesn't keep his word, he's got family on his back too.
We want to thank everybody for coming. We really appreciate you being here. We promised to get you out of here on time, and we certainly want to do that. I'm just sitting here thinking, I couldn't help but bring this up because we've been talking about the need for honest men. And my daughter sent me an email the other day, and it was about this fellow who had applied for a job. And in his job interview, the interviewer asked him, he said, well, could you tell me if there are any flaws in your character? And the guy said, yep, I'm honest. And the guy that was interviewing him said, well, I don't see anything wrong with that. And he said, well, I don't really give a damn what you think.
He was too honest.
I'm just repeating my daughter. Thank you so much for being here. We do need honest men, and thank goodness we do have some among us. Please come back third Thursday. Thank you.